say some things.
Hello. Adventure.
Love. Connection.
Risk. Passion.
Revolution.
Play.
Life. The Archetypal Tarot Podcast. Provocative mythology for the 21st century.
Hi there, Julienne here, and this episode is part 2 of my conversation with Archetypal Astrologer Shawn Nygaard of Imagine Astrology. And you know how it is when you get into it with a really good friend and you just have to dive deep on topics, and that's exactly what we did, specifically around the upcoming Saturn in Capricorn conjunct Pluto, because that is some deep and interesting stuff. So as our conversations go, we talked about all kinds of things: pop culture, race, how we are doing what we're supposed to be doing here in the world, and how we can support each other in doing that. So I love this conversation, and I hope you do too. So enjoy it and stay until the end, because Shawn is giving away a very cool lecture. So if you're listening to this mid-March to mid-April, get on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram and enter. Hope you enjoy the show. Aloha. Hello, Shawn. Welcome back.
Hello.
Hello. So this is Archetypal Tarot Podcast meets Imagine Astrology for what we're calling, I'm just going to call it some scary shit, but that's me. It's just me being crass, but fascinating. And in the 2 minutes that we had between recording the end of the last podcast and this one, I was really thinking, oh, well, we'll put it out for patrons only. But I'm like, yeah, I can't do that, because it really is such interesting and I think important information that I can't bogart it and just hold it for the patrons, because we only have a dozen of them. So I'm going to be Taurian in my generosity, or whatever you call it, to say, no, I'll put this out. I think I'll put it out maybe a week or two later, just to give people some time to digest. But we have to talk about some shit here, and it's essentially Saturn in Capricorn. I'd love to kind of get your overview of what that is, but then also the conjunct Pluto will be happening in, you said, 2 years. So it's just, take it away, Shawn. I'm infinitely fascinated by this, and I have a feeling our audience will be too.
Okay, yeah. I mean, thank you for giving me a chance to do this. And normally I teach this in, recently I did an hour-long talk, so it's kind of a ramping up to that instead of just diving into it. But I will say, with Saturn in Capricorn, Saturn is a planet of responsibility and maturity of a particular kind. And it does relate to physical reality, as opposed to psychic reality. But all of the planets, when we talk archetypes, have archetypal reality, for sure.
Yeah.
But, there's something about Saturn that, because it has to do with mortality and limits and, just a ton of things, I like to focus right now with Saturn and Capricorn on the word sober, because sober means, I have it. Hang on one second here. Sober means appropriately solemn, serious, and not giddy. So there's something about the times we're in that can start to take on that quality. And if you think of the songs that I listed, The End of the Innocents and Oh Father and Woman in Chains, which is a beautiful lament, it's it's an intimidating title, but it's a beautiful song. But, there's nothing giddy about these, and it's very serious stuff. And there's something about when you take seriousness seriously, not only that, but it's just really amazing. And it's important because Saturn is the mediator between the external world out there and your internal world in here. Because Saturn rules the skin. And so, it's got a lot to do with the balance in your life, and it's going to be different for each person, but it's the balance in your life between how much of your life is pulled toward the external world in terms of responsibilities that tug at you, and how much of your life comes from the inside out, where you start with your psyche, you start with your soul, And that's why you're here. And that's what guides you. And I like to put that, as the soul first, because when I call my work Imagine Astrology, it was Carl Jung who said that the primary activity of the soul is to imagine, is to fantasize. And it's from the imagination that reality is created. He said the psyche creates reality every day. And so I like to know with people, what's inside of you? What are you made of? And so Saturn is the mediator between these two realms. And if you are pulled by an enormously busy schedule, for example, that's not necessarily working for you, now is a time to reel it in and to start constructing your life and recalibrating your life so it's more on your terms, And one of the examples that I use when I teach this is Toni Morrison, the author, the award winner. And she's, because she was born with Saturn in Capricorn, and it was paired up with the planet Venus when she was born. And, she's somebody who, she has this other quote that she says where she says, "There is nothing, believe me, more satisfying, more gratifying than true adulthood." And she's somebody who embodies that. And what she does in her life is she embodies, the extraordinary power of shutting out the external world, going inside and creating from there, because that's how she writes. That's how she comes up with these extraordinary books that she does. But, as I've been doing research and things, over the years, and I've come back to use Toni Morrison's chart again and again for different things. But with Saturn in Capricorn, she's got Saturn in her chart is opposing tightly the planet Pluto. And so there's this very strong connection in her chart between Saturn and Pluto. And one of the topics that she covers quite a bit in her books is slavery.
Mm-hmm.
And so, this is just a part of my life and awareness, as I've read her books. And, so in doing my research, I was looking at the cycles of Saturn and Capricorn and knowing that on January, let me find the exact date here, January 12th, 2020, Saturn will be in a conjunction in our sky right now, in 2020 with the planet Pluto. And Pluto in myth is the lord of the underworld. It's like Hades, the ruler of the dead.
Too. Pluto is
transformation
and change.
And Saturn is a planet, that's kind of the stern taskmaster, as well as everything that I previously said. There's a lot to each planet. And just to back up for a second, Saturn is the planet of melancholy and depression, which sounds horrible, right? Like, why do we want to be talking about this? But, Saturn in Capricorn, Saturn moved into Capricorn at the start of the Great Depression. And I don't think that that's an echo of what we're having right now. But, every time Saturn moves into Capricorn, there's a shift into something more serious. And, that's the realm that we're in right now. But what was really interesting in my research, and I brought up the issue of melancholy and depression because, one of the primary functions of depression is the move inward. Toni Morrison almost seeks that out so that she can move inward. She doesn't mind not being busy. She doesn't mind not having a huge ton of things to do on her plate because she needs that to be able to get to that state of mind that goes inward. And Saturn was the planet most associated in ancient times with the temperament of genius, which isn't high intelligence. It's that ability to connect with your own daimon, to connect with your own guiding spirit, and so she would connect with that sense in herself, that creative source, and come out with these books. And so depression is a big thing with this. in the sense of that move inward into the psyche, into something not literal. And so, it was interesting to look at this upcoming Saturn conjunction with Pluto and to, pull up my charts and to see when that has happened before. And it happened, the last time it happened was January 3rd, 1518. So this is, as of right now, 500 years ago.
Wow.
502 years ago. And the reason I think that's significant is that, when you have a birthday, that's the return of the sun to where it was when you were born. And we celebrate that. And when Saturn returns when you're 29 years old or so, that's a earmark in somebody's life. That's significant time in someone's life. And so things return, on time. And when something hasn't returned for 500 years, that packs quite a punch. And what's significant is that 500 years ago, that year 1518, is generally understood to be the start of the African slave trade. And I know people go, and when I've been talking about this for a couple of years now, approaching this, and
that's
anytime
how you
I've
can
told
talk about this. In my ears, it's still relatively new, and I'm like,
yeah. But anybody I've told, it's like their jaw drops, or
we're
their
like,
breath goes,
It's symptomatic, I think, of an arc that we're seeing more now, and that is there's so much that's been underneath that is being brought to light that it really is too much for a lot of people.
Exactly.
It is the Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter, all of these things for a lot of people. I mean, I think you have to be incredibly introspective, humble, flexible, just to be able to take it in. Many people are not able to take it in. The reality of how we have consciously or unconsciously treated the other. And that when you're talking about echoes of the slave trade in 500 years, in one sense it's like, oh God, we fucking can't take anymore. But at the same time, what it could also be is like an opening to some realizations that can't be thrown back under the rug,
Right. And that's, for me, it's easier to talk about because I spent, my entire 20s, and a little bit before that and a bit after that, doing this kind of work, looking at these kinds of issues. And so it's just been a part of my life, for decades now. And, what I really like, why I brought up Toni Morrison, is because she's hooked into this cycle. You can tell by what her books are about, and you can tell by how the approach that she takes and the seriousness with which she approaches it. And one of the things she refers to in one interview is what she calls the master narrative. She's talking with Bill Moyers, and she mentions this, and he's like, what is that? What? The master narrative? And she says, the master narrative is whatever ideological script is being imposed by the people in authority on everybody else. The master fiction, history, it has a certain point of view. And I love this because that's the way that I've started to look at this 500-year cycle. Is if we're talking about the African slave trade, and we're, which founded this country, and we're thinking about the imperialism and the colonialism. And the move west that, is the underpinnings of the entire foundation of this country, step foot on land and start killing people so that we can take over and,
Columbus.
Things like that. And what's that?
I said Columbus. But 1518, oh, this is just hitting a huge chord with me. It basically is the beginning, the birth of the whole idea that there is a race. There are races. There's only one race. The reality is there's only one, but that master narrative of the fact that there are different races not just
Yeah.
like white and black, but different races, and that there's this whole cockamamie like hierarchy. I mean, we understand that the hierarchy is, I understand that it's not real, but it's real. It is real because people have decided it's real, and they live in that space, and they don't want to leave that space because, for a lot of reasons, it's complex.
And I mean,
wow,
it provides a structure. I mean, it's an archetypal pattern.
It's a pattern,
and
it preserves power.
Yeah, it's very connected to Saturn and Capricorn. And when Saturn and Pluto join up, it's an earmark of empire. So it carries that much pack with it, that much power with it. And with Pluto and Capricorn, it entered Capricorn in 2008. And one of the reasons that I think, when I look at this, why we're seeing the culture shift toward the alt-right authoritarianism, at the same time that Black Lives Matter and the issues of race have come up and started bubbling up even more and more and more, and are harder and harder to pack away, is because part of Pluto and Capricorn is that it undoes the structures. And like you were saying earlier, that word transformation, it's like the policies and that master narrative that's built into the structures of our government and the institutions of the country can no longer support the master narrative. And so as that unravels and it unwinds and it starts to come undone, it can no longer hold these policies tightly. And so this is the time, and this is why I think it's so exciting to talk about, is that this is the time to shift 500 years of history in such a way that you can't go back to the way that it was. Of course, these are huge things, and so they don't just shift overnight. But that's why I like to teach this in a longer arc, because, in a longer time period of a couple of hours at least, because I can really get at, the symbolism of Capricorn and, the signs around it, and how this is really a rather incredible time that we're living in to watch this, this come apart, this thing that's been here for 500 years. That's been driving things, that's been driving what we don't know, what's taught in history in schools typically and all that.
Geez. Yeah.
But we can look around and see all of this start to shift now. And, you were talking about the different races, and Toni Morrison, on cue, because she's just tied into this. She did these Norton lectures at Harvard, and she talked about otherness. And she talked about romancing slavery. And she says this extraordinary thing that you almost have to hear in context, and you almost have to hear, because she says, what is race but genetic imagination? And she can say we're all one race, but you don't want to go too quickly to we're all one race, because it skips over all of the significant differences in cultures and backgrounds, which are part of what I, think is so extraordinary and vital and important. But what is race but genetic imagination? Yeah. Isn't that brilliant?
Isn't that brilliant? And I think that is part of the difficulty, the struggle, what have you, is because there's this constructed idea of race that made things about race that ignores the cultural. Right? Or it pulls it along in little pieces, and it's used as stereotypes and all these things, but it basically belies the really experience and understanding of cultures, because everything got attached to race, and that got attached to power, and that there's always somebody on top, and that person was always going to be white. And so there's this whole, like, even whiteness is a lie, like any different race is incorrect. And that's a tough nut for a lot of people to crack. And it's pretty easy to look back in most people's history primers, probably more so of people older than us, but I'm pretty sure I recall in 3rd or 4th grade learning in some book that there was the Mongoloid, the Negroid, and the, the Caucasoid or whatever. I mean, it's just completely made up bullshit. But like, your kids, you're taught, the teacher says this, and, I don't remember looking around in the class and thinking, oh, they're different races. It was more like, it's this thing, but it's been so completely baked into everything. And that it's not going to be unraveled. There is something that I love this conversation, but I'm also holding it in a way that like shit's going to be difficult, people. And that's kind of what you're saying. Well, it's building to something, and hopefully, to me anyway, this is my opinion, that consciousness and a breaking out of this idea of the separateness, not easy, but kind of the only way we can go at this point.
And I like to talk about this stuff because I like difficult things like that. I mean, I find them incredibly interesting. And, when you think of I don't think it's a surprise to anybody that it's difficult times. And particularly when we look at the emergence of dystopias.
Oh, God, yeah.
We can see, that it's the Saturn-Pluto conjunction as it's getting closer and closer. And part of why...
Tale. I mean, it's very... At its worst, it's the Handmaid's Tale.
And it's because these are the imaginings of what I think emerged from this master narrative. These are the it could go this route, and that would really suck. But there's people like Junot Diaz who look at the global dystopias and encourages people to think like this and to come up with the stories, because they are another archetypal way of recognizing what the psyche is up to and seeing what kind of hope we can pull from these things. But it does fit into the greater symbolism of Capricorn, because if you think about it, the start of Capricorn is the start of winter, and it's the start. It signifies the winter solstice, which happens to be the longest, darkest night of the whole year, right? And so as planets move through Sagittarius, everything is just increasing in darkness, and it's ramping up to that longest, darkest night. But what's significant here is that, once Saturn and Pluto pair up in 2020 and then start moving, on from there, what you have is the slow and steady increase of light. And I like to find the things that offer a genuinely hopeful perspective, because I don't feel like I'm not an empty, hopeful person. I don't like to just offer hope for the heck of it,
right?
Because it's got to be there. I like to recognize, and this is what I find so extraordinary, is that Capricorn does announce the longest, darkest night, and after that point, you start the steady increase of light, the steady emergence of new life. And I really go into this when I teach this, but do you see what I mean?
I do.
I'm talking about the way the sun moves, but the symbolism applies to any planet in moving through the zodiac. It follows these things. And, I just think there's just something so amazing about the fact that it may be slow, but every little step has an incremental increase of light. And I think that's hopeful, and we'll start to be, now is the time to imagine. Now is the time, like at night, to dream. Now is the time to wonder. And I think it's very difficult to, because what comes up is these dystopias, or what comes up is some really difficult stuff. But that's what I like to look at. That's what I like to look at with people, is a lot of the difficult stuff. And, what life starts to emerge as the light starts to emerge with the symbolism of these planets. There's something I'm really paying attention to.
And how long is Capricorn or Saturn in Capricorn?
Saturn's in Capricorn for about 3 years.
Okay.
So it moves into Aquarius later in 2020.
Later in 2020. Okay, no. It's really, really good, and I'm encouraged by a couple of things. As we were talking about in the previous podcast, the preponderance of our superhero films, and the most recent ones being, by and large, a African American cast or African
Yeah,
black
exactly.
cast.
I thought of that when you mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, like, oh goodness, and actually a friend of mine was in the film and is doing all the red carpet stuff. So I'm in his feed, so I'm seeing a lot of stuff he's posting, and I'm just, I get goosebumps because it's just like having attention that's not, it's just the superhero attention of a group of people who have long, had not been represented. And it's not just celebrating that, but just like the true, like, let's all go see these movies. Because I am bereft, having grown up in the United States and haven't had examples, such a wide example of people, diversity, and entire shows that are mostly made up of people who don't look like me. Like, I'm okay with that. I mean, but I realize I've got the privilege to feel that way. But like, can we have more of this? Can we just keep showing that the strength of each other, the interesting, and I really get annoyed when people go, oh, Star Wars is far too diverse now, and I'm like, shut the fuck up, like, just sit down. Just sit down.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny when it comes to the human looking diversity, because when you think of the diversity of aliens in Star Wars,
I know
it doesn't lack
it's
diversity, but
always
it's just
been
because
there.
we want more of that. But then when it comes human, it becomes controversial.
Exactly.
Do you want to hear? This takes a little bit to spin out, but the extraordinary Black Panther thing.
Yeah.
This is how deep archetypal symbolism goes, and when James Hillman recognizes archetypes as the deepest patterns of psychic functioning. Okay. It's like, I think this is what he's getting at. Is I've spent a lot of time looking at the cosmology or the astrology of ancient Babylonia. So we're talking, 3,000 or 4,000 years ago.
Like you do.
And they didn't have Capricorn or Sagittarius or anything like that. They just had the constellations. But they did have the goatfish, the mergoat, which is Capricorn. And then they had a centaur, which is like what we call Sagittarius. Except their centaur it had wings and it had two heads. So it had like a human head looking forward and an animal head facing backward. And the symbolism of this was that for them, everything began at the winter solstice and ended at the winter solstice. So we talk about Aries as the start of the zodiac because it's spring and it's light and all that. But for ancient Babylonia, it was the winter solstice was the beginning and end of everything. And so as the centaur becomes the focus at that time of year, approaching the winter solstice, they considered that to be the opening of the gates of the underworld. And it was the centaur's job with his bow and arrow to guide all of the recently deceased souls through the gates into the underworld so that they could enter the afterlife and go up and be with the other souls in the Milky Way. It was this beautiful imagery, but it had the bow and arrow to kind of fend off demons who would kind of get in the way and hamper, these souls getting into the underworld. But I just kept studying this, and I was like, there's something really fascinating going on here. So now that was the recent time with Saturn and Sagittarius. And do you remember Beyonce was it the Super Bowl or was it just another football game where she had the halftime show?
Mm-hmm.
And it was the Super Bowl, yeah, because it was in February. Mm-hmm. And do you remember what she did that was so controversial?
I saw it. I saw it on little bits of YouTube. I don't watch the Super Bowl, but go ahead.
You're not supposed to be political if you're performing at the halftime.
Oh, of course.
She had all of her dancers dress up, evoking the Black Panther movement.
Yeah, that's right.
The Black Panther movement. And now look at the movies that were popular at that time. You had Zootopia, which was all animals, including Black Panthers. You had The Jungle Book, and one of like Mowgli's teacher was a Black Panther. And you had, I think at the time, was it the Civil War movie? I think it was Captain America Civil War?
Yes.
And that was the first one to feature the Black Panther. So the top 3 movies at the time I was doing my research in the world all featured a Black Panther. And Beyonce evoked the Black Panther movement. I happened to go to San Francisco at that time to do an astrology talk, and a friend took me to Oakland where it happened that the Black Panther movement emerged. And so in doing my research, what I discovered is that animal head of the centaur was a panther head. Because the panther was the animal of the lord of the underworld, Nurgle, back then. So you've got panthers everywhere. And I was like, oh my God, and so to know that the Black Panther movie is coming out now, I think is the great next step. But it's like, that's, I think, how deep the culture works with these archetypes, whether we know it or not, is that it's just evoking these things. And little did I know when I started studying it, that it all goes back to ancient Babylonia, which is the Middle East. It's just extraordinary.
It is. And hopeful too, I think. When Saturn in Capricorn, my personal sort of sense of Capricorn, or one of the ways I interpret Capricorn, is also and Saturn as well, but the Capricorn people I know that embody Capricorn, whether it's applied to their entire life or maybe just one part of it, they are really responsible people, meaning they're able to respond, right?
Yeah.
Responsible. It's not just like being responsible. It's just like there's a strength and there's ability. There's a yes. There's an internal yes to dealing with circumstances as they are, and that doesn't mean you're not able to dream and imagine things, but it's really just like, if you want to have somebody in your life you can rely on to take care of something come what may, get a Capricorn, because they just tend to be able to deal with stuff. Now on the difficult side, the Capricorns, because two of my brothers are Capricorns, they are like, their ability to be overly responsible like drive me crazy, but I like that as an overarching theme, is we need to take responsibility. We need to be able to see that strength in ourselves to be able to respond to what's happening.
And when I work with people, it's like I do have to go back to that distinction. First to say, from your brother's point of views, are they being too responsible? And that's where, as an astrologer, I step back and go, that might just be perfect for them.
Right.
I can't look at it and say too responsible. Otherwise, I'm putting a little too much of myself in. But the other distinction I need to make is, are people responding to every need in the external world that calls their attention, or are they responding to the needs of their own soul? And that can be a big distinction for a lot of people.
Know.
Well, you can know. I mean,
about another person, though. You know what I mean?
That's what I've done with, in working with people and working with their chart and working with their life, when particularly people for whom I do more than one reading, so you can really start to get into things in a deeper way. It's like, a lot of times people pulled in the outer world are they feel like they can't say no to something, or it's not coming from inside, and they're trying, part of coming to me for a reading is starting to facilitate that shift. Because, I think that ability to respond from the inside out is what makes all the difference in the world for people. It's life changing. And and some people it can take a bit of time to recalibrate that system. But any time that I've worked with people and they do that, it's life changing and it's amazing, because being responsible to one's own soul is really a powerful place to be, as as Toni Morrison demonstrates so well.
Yeah. It reminds me of something you said about your working with clients and your particular flavor of your approach to archetypal astrology is it gives people a license to live their own life.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Like that.
That's one of the things that I find so little did I know heading into astrology that this would become a big thing but to reminding people that it's your life, actually has become a significant piece of what I do. It's your life. And I go back to ancient times where, one of the, because the US doesn't really have the kind of mythic background, that awarely that other cultures did. And one of my favorite stories from a culture is
it has Native American tribes.
Yeah.
Who have a mythology, but yeah, you're right.
It's different.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, one culture, I don't know which it was, but they have this story that, before somebody's born, all these souls are hanging out in a tree watching the events of Earth, and when one of the souls sees something that really interests it going down on the planet, it says, that's really interesting to me. And then that soul gets born into the planet to experience that. And what I love about that is it's got this kind of implication that we're here because we want to be here.
Yes.
And we're here with a purpose to our life. And so when people are really drawn toward their passions, not in a superficial way, but in a way that is like, at the end of the day, this is what they simply can't deny, that's, to me, a very powerful place to live from. But, I love that notion that we're here because we want to be. It's not a punitive thing. It's not a punishment thing. It's not an endless trial of improvement. Yeah, it's like some people, it's like Earth School, and that's great. But it's like I like this notion that we're here because we want to be, and when we trust our passions, in that deep way. I was talking with a friend recently who is having a hard time. Have they just gone the wrong way in their life? And I was like, you know what to do. It's like, you know what to do when you go into a bookstore. You don't buy books that are the wrong books, right? You don't leave the bookstore with the wrong books. You know what you're drawn to and you know what you're good. So just go look at your bookshelf and you'll see all of these books that you chose to buy because you had this desire to. And you were drawn to that and you were drawn towards the right thing. Now just apply that to your life. You know which directions to go. And the thing is, it just takes a lot of courage to actually go in that direction, and that's, one of the curious things about life. Why is it so hard to live our life, So.
Oh, no, I think that is just the right place to wrap this up, unless you have something that we didn't hit that we
hit a lot more than I thought we would. So this is great.
I know, and that the message of living your passion. I mean, it's almost been kind of worn out in a way, or at least amongst a certain sort of group of us, but. That really understanding that passion's going to be painful sometimes. It's going to be a lot of different things. There's a lot of thresholds. I love the symbol of that and I hope that is this the Saturn Capricorn Pluto conjunct thing happening, is that it can be, although difficult and painful and confusing, but the threshold is related to the word thrashing, which means you're pulling the chaff away from the wheat. You're getting to the truth of things, and that thresholds by their very nature are scary. Sometimes I've appreciated in my life when I've been pushed through them, when I didn't have the choice to really walk up through them. It was sort of like, I'm in it. Because, just the procrastination I will ensue. But it's a brilliant reminder that, maybe we chose to be here. Maybe this is where and when we're supposed to put our thing down, to do our thing. And it's not really up to anybody else to tell us, or a magazine or whatever. When we get close to that star, when we get close to that warmth, just to keep following it. Because I think we all need each other to be doing that. And if more of us do that, things tend to move smoother and faster, and it lights the candle for other people.
It makes a big difference, I think. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And good friends help keep us pointed back in that direction. And I'm counting you as one of those, Mr. Nygaard.
Thank you. Likewise.
Oh, my goodness. So we just recorded 2 podcasts.
Cool.
Yay for us. All right. I will make sure people are reminded of how to find you, how to book a reading with you, how to follow your blog, and all of that. So
thank you.
You're welcome. No, it's
I appreciate
fabulous. Cool. So until next time, I'm going to sign off the show. Thanks again, Shawn, and aloha. We know you could have done something else with the last 45-ish minutes of your life, but we are so glad you spent it with us. You can find out more about Shawn at his website, imagineastrology.com, and follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and or Twitter, and look for the giveaway post where you could win a recording of A Brief Introduction to Archetypal Astrology by Shawn Nygaard. So go over there and check that out. We'll post them twice in the next month, and I hope you win. And if you would like to become one of our most favorite people in the world, become a patron. Just visit tiny.cc/tarot, and you too could be like these awesome humans: Richard, Sarah, Talia, Hillary, Peter, Rash, Christine, Kat, Allie, and Geneva. This podcast is produced by Both End Media, and our theme music is by The Lunar Group.